Lisa, I want to get to you. You're going to be in the courtroom in Manhattan on Monday. The first criminal trial getting underway. Jury selection kicks things off. It's expected to last who knows how long. Maybe you can give us some guidance on that. And what are we hearing from Judge Marchand about what would be instant juror disqualifiers?
Let's start, Peter, with what we expect in terms of the length of jury selection. That process is expected to last 1 to 2 weeks. And the way that Judge Marchand has arranged for jury selection should be maybe more immune than other processes to abuse. But this is Donald Trump, whose defense just tried 3 times in 3 days to postpone the onset of the trial. So I suppose anything is possible in terms of their desire to elongate jury selection and make this as painful as possible. In terms of the immediate disqualifiers, one thing that Judge Marchand has already told the parties is if somebody self-identifies as unable to serve or says there's no way I could be fair and impartial here, that person is going to be dismissed with no further questions asked. In the usual course, that's not what happens. But he says examining these people one by one, pressing them for their reasons why, would be inefficient, unnecessary, and time-consuming in a trial that is already expected to last 4 to 6 weeks.
You see the bottom on their media consumption among the questionnaire that the jurors, potential jurors, will be asked about. Catherine, I want to ask you because Michael Cohen, of course, the former Trump attorney, he's likely to be one of the key witnesses here. Other names we're expected to see, Hope Hicks, Stormy Daniels. So who stands out to you from this potential witness list as those voices that are going to be key, and what should we specifically be watching for?
Well, obviously Michael Cohen, because he's the one who's going to say he made the payments to Stormy Daniels. He visited Donald Trump in the White House, and they came up with this reimbursement agreement, and it would be called legal expenses when in fact it wasn't. The whole 34 counts are about falsifying the Trump Organization's business records, identifying checks, invoices, and ledger entries as legal expenses to Michael Cohen when they in fact were not. So he's a key. And you can expect in their jury selection, the prosecution, you do this every time you have a witness who has baggage. They're going to ask, you're going to hear from a witness for the prosecution. You're going to hear that he has a criminal conviction. You're going to hear that he has a conviction for lying. So you want to be able to put that right out there. So you want to find out if anyone could just say, well, I won't be able to listen to his testimony if someone has that in their background. So you want to get those people, if you're the prosecutor, off the jury.
I want to ask Harry about what I read in Politico today. It was pointing out how Mr. Trump has railed against a 2-tiered system of justice, but he's the one benefiting from it, they write. The piece digs into how Trump, quote, denigrates prosecutors, lies about his cases, vilifies the judges and their families. Yet he has never faced repercussions routinely imposed on other defendants. I was struck by this article because it talks about another firebrand politician named Donald, who 15 years ago, this was I think it was a Dallas City Council member who did a lot of similar things, but the judge did not put up with it and ultimately put him behind bars, that separate Donald, for like 30 days. Now you got a different Donald Trump. He's going to be in court several days a week, 4 days a week. His dirty laundry going to be hanging out for all the country to hear again. Historically, when he's attacked, Harry, he lashes out. He is under a strict gag order right now. Judge Marchand seems to have no appetite for those antics. What should we be watching for on that front? And what do you make of this sort of argument that he is benefiting from the 2-tier system of justice in many ways?
Look, I think it's clear that any other defendant in various cases would have been already put in jail to forced compliance, and there's all kinds of reasons that judges are trying not to do that here. But in terms of this trial, something very important is happening Monday. Jurors are coming into play. And so when he makes, he really only has like one speed, a very thin playbook, and he will rail against the judge, or he'll try to rail against the prosecution. And if that kind of information gets into the jurors' ears and minds, that's a problem for the fairness of the proceedings. So I think you're going to hear some very kind of contentious. He's not going to change from what he's been doing the last couple weeks or last couple years. Rail against the judge, rail against the system, except he's not permitted to prejudice the jury pool now. So you're going to see Merchan really try to be firm with him, and there'll be battles and questions about whether this jury heard this or this juror heard that. It's going, and that's not going to stop, by the way. You know, any defendant now, you're told to just like try to be nice and be nice to the jury. Trump doesn't know how to do that. It's going to be a big challenge every day, 4 days a week.
And Catherine, as we've seen so many times, there's like a little timeline of his stream of consciousness thoughts, his commentary throughout every twist and turn of each of these criminal cases. What are the chances that Mr. Trump would take the stand in his own defense?
I don't think there's a snowball chance in a very hot place of him ever doing that. It will be very good for the prosecution, but very bad for him. Also, what he won't be allowed to do is what he did in the Jean Carroll case, is stand up and walk out of the courtroom. He will be seated at that table throughout the trial. Neither he or his lawyers or the prosecutors can just get up and walk out without the permission of the court, unless there's a break. So he's going to have to behave himself.
And to be clear, his complaints, his behavior outside the courtroom, that'll be what most of us see. But what he says or what is said in front of the judge and the jury is ultimately what's going to matter in the course of this case. Ken Dilanian, Lisa Rubin, Catherine Christian, Harry Litman, our experts today. We appreciate all of you guys.
Hey, everyone. MSNBC has a new and improved app. You'll get real-time alerts and analysis, live blogs, in-depth essays, video highlights, and the best 2024 election coverage. Download the new MSNBC app. Here's how to do it. You tap on the App Store on your phone. You hit search on the bottom right corner. You type in MSNBC. You click on the MSNBC app. You click on Get or the cloud icon and enjoy it.